I'm a hunter, and I was out hunting alone when Bigfoot attacked me, and what happened right after is the most horrifying thing Bigfoot has ever done to any hunter. I shook with a terror I had never known existed, and after experiencing the horror of what it did to me, I will never be able to hunt again. The morning of October 11, 1987, found me 40 miles east of Randall, Washington. I am Frank Cutler, 53 years old, a retired Army scout who traded 2 tours and half a career for a hunting guide business and a house at the edge of these mountains. My knees had been aching since before sunrise, but it didn't matter once I found the tracks. A 12-point buck had come through here recently, hooves pressed fresh into the mud beside a narrow creek, and I crouched low to read the story the ground was telling me. That was when I noticed the prints were wrong. They were not the tracks of an animal grazing its way downhill. They were erratic, panicked, sudden leaps and hard cuts that a healthy buck only makes when something big is chasing it, and I had not heard a single predator call all morning. Stranger still, every hard cut in that trail bent the same direction, west and downhill, as if something unseen were steering the deer rather than simply pursuing it. I scanned the canopy above me and saw nothing but branches and gray sky, yet the hair on the back of my neck stood up the way it used to, right before an ambush overseas. I chambered a round in my rifle out of habit, not fear, because in 40 years in these woods, I had never once needed fear to keep me alive. I had no idea that something was already watching me from a granite outcropping 50 yards up the slope, 280 pounds of muscle wrapped in matted fur, crouched dead still, patient as stone, and that something was Bigfoot. I did not see Bigfoot at first. I felt it the way you feel a truck coming before you hear the engine, a pressure in the air that did not belong. I straightened up from the tracks and turned toward the outcropping, and that is when the shadow among the boulders resolved into shape, into a broad back and long arms and a head too large and too still to be anything but purpose. Bigfoot did not move. It only watched, its yellow eyes catching what little light made it through the cedar canopy. And for 3 full seconds, neither of us so much as breathed. Even folded down among the boulders, it looked wrong for the landscape. Shoulders too broad for any bear I had ever guided a client past, arms hanging long enough that its knuckles nearly grazed the granite it crouched on. Its fur was a deep reddish brown, matted in places with mud and old pine pitch, and along one forearm I could see a pale scar running through the hair, proof this was not the first time Bigfoot had walked away from something that should have killed it. The size alone should have made it slow, clumsy, the kind of animal that telegraphs its intentions through sheer bulk. But there was nothing clumsy in the way it held itself, coiled and balanced like a linebacker waiting for a snap count that only it could hear. Weight resting on the balls of both feet as if it had done this 100 times before and knew exactly how the next few minutes were going to unfold. I had heard stories my whole life working these mountains, campfire talk from other guides, secondhand sightings dismissed over beer, and none of it had prepared me for how wrong it felt to stand in the presence of something that size holding so much stillness in its body. Bigfoot was not stalking the buck. The buck had already been used and discarded, left behind like bait that had done its job. And I understood in that instant, with the kind of clarity that only comes right before violence, that the deer's trail had been steered past this exact spot on purpose. Bigfoot was not hunting. It was waiting on something, and some old instinct told me it was not food. Bigfoot had been waiting for me. I took one step backward, testing the ground behind me without taking my eyes off the outcropping, and the world above me exploded. Bigfoot came down out of the canopy like a freight train tearing through a paper wall, snapping limbs the width of my arm as it fell, and I dove left on instinct alone. My rifle spun out of my hands and cracked against a boulder somewhere behind me, and I hit the forest floor rolling as a hand the size of a garbage can lid swept through the exact space my skull had occupied a half-second earlier. That hand did not miss me clean. It caught the strap of my backpack and shredded it like wet paper, though the swipe looked wild. The fingers closed with a strange precision as if checking what the pack held before flinging it aside, a detail that would matter more later. And my gear went flying in every direction, my water bottle bouncing off a stump, my compass skittering into the brush, my emergency blanket unrolling across the ferns like a flag of surrender. My eyes found the rifle first, lying against the base of a boulder 8 feet away, scope cracked against the granite, barrel dusted with bark and dirt, and I lunged for it on instinct before common sense caught up with me. Bigfoot was already surging back out of the tree line by the time my fingers brushed the stock, close enough that I felt the ground shudder under its charge, and I abandoned the rifle half a second before before a swinging arm would have taken my hand off at the wrist along with it. I scrambled up onto my knees and drew my sidearm, a Sig Sauer P320 I had carried on my hip every single day since I retired, and I put 3 rounds center mass into the shape that was already retreating into the tree line. Bigfoot roared at the impact, but it was not a sound of pain. It was closer to a bull elk snorting at an insult, deep and furious and entirely unbothered, and it melted back into the shadows between the cedars. I heard Bigfoot circling after that, branches snapping in a wide, deliberate arc around my position, and I understood the pattern before my brain had even finished processing it. It was not fleeing, it was pacing off a perimeter, corralling me the way a sheepdog works a flock, pushing me without ever showing itself twice from the same angle. I fired 2 more rounds toward the sound of cracking wood, wasting ammunition I could not afford to waste, because I have counted every bullet I have fired since I was 19 years old, and I knew exactly how many I had left. 6 rounds remained in that pistol. 6 rounds against something that had shrugged off 3 hits like they were mosquito bites. The circling stopped as suddenly as it started, and the forest went dead silent except for my own ragged breathing. Then it shattered. A boulder the size of a microwave came sailing out of the tree line so fast I barely registered the movement before it screamed past my face, slamming into a cedar trunk behind me with a crack that sounded like a rifle shot and exploding the bark into a cloud of splinters. A second, smaller stone followed almost before the first had settled, and I twisted away too slow, catching it across the shoulder hard enough to spin me half around and drop me onto one knee, dirt spraying into my face as my palms slammed down to keep from collapsing completely. Both throws had come from different angles along the same arc, and both had landed close enough to hurt without landing anywhere close to fatal. No bear, no person, no animal I had ever heard of could throw something that heavy with that kind of speed and accuracy, let alone that kind of restraint. Bigfoot was not just circling anymore. It had stopped watching and started interacting, testing distances, testing my reflexes, gauging exactly how fast I could react. It had thrown both rocks without exposing itself once, which meant it knew exactly where I was, while making sure I never got a clear look at where it stood. That was somehow worse. That was the moment everything changed. Up until then, I had convinced myself that maybe I could hold my position, make enough noise, and discourage whatever was stalking me. That illusion disappeared the instant those rocks started flying. Standing my ground against something that outweighed me by 5 times and could hurl 100-pound stones the way a professional pitcher throws a fastball was not courage, it was suicide. Every second I stayed where I was gave it another chance to measure the next throw a little better than the last. I finally accepted the reality I had been trying to avoid since entering the forest. I was not dealing with an animal defending territory. I was prey, and something hidden in the trees was deciding how long it wanted the chase to last, as if deciding was not the same thing as wanting this over quickly. I made the only decision that still gave me a chance. I turned, ignored the pain burning through my shoulder, and ran. I did not get 10 yards before Bigfoot broke cover behind me, no longer content to circle from the shadows, and I felt the ground shudder under its first heavy stride. I cut hard to my right around a fallen nurse log, slick with moss, hoping the obstacle would cost it a fraction of a second, and it did, but only a fraction. Bigfoot cleared the same log in a single bound that sent bark and rotted wood spraying in every direction, and I heard the wet crack of its palms slamming down on the far side, close enough that splinters stung the back of my neck. I did not slow down to check how close it had come. I already knew. I bolted downhill through a wall of salal and devil's club that whipped my face and forearms raw, and behind me I could hear Bigfoot closing the distance in a way that should not have been possible for something so large. Each footfall landed like a dropped anvil, shaking loose dirt from the slope above me, and twice it slammed a shoulder into a tree beside my head, hard enough to splinter the trunk, close enough that bark sprayed across my jacket. It roared directly behind my ear at one point, a sound so low it vibrated in my chest cavity rather than my eardrums, and the smell that came with it was unmistakable, even at a dead sprint. Wet fur and rotted meat, and something ancient underneath that had no comparison in my memory. Bigfoot was herding me again, exactly like it had herded that buck, driving me toward a destination it had already chosen, and I had no way to fight the direction of the chase without losing precious seconds I did not have. Every time I drifted toward open ground on my right, a roar or a slammed shoulder came from that side to push me left instead, though I had no way yet to know why that direction mattered. Why wasn't it taking the easiest chance to kill me instead of forcing me somewhere else? The chase carried me into a maze of fallen cedar where I had to climb over slick trunks while Bigfoot crashed straight through them, splintering decades-old timber. A branch tore open my pant leg as it closed to within 20 feet. The ground suddenly gave way beneath me, and I dropped into a steep ravine, sliding 30 feet over loose rock. I shredded both palms trying to slow myself, twisted my left ankle, and crashed into a shallow creek below. Bigfoot stopped at the rim instead of making the jump, roaring in frustration. I thought the ravine had finally bought me time until I spotted what looked like a second Bigfoot on the opposite rim. A moment later, I realized it was the same one circling around on a game trail above the ravine, already cutting me off again. I did not wait to see what it decided to do next. I forced myself upright on a screaming ankle and started limping downstream, every step sending a sharp pulse of pain through my leg that nearly buckled my knee. My breathing came in short, ragged bursts as I tried to put distance between myself and the last place it had thrown those rocks. Behind me, I could already hear branches snapping high above the canyon, heavy impacts spaced just far enough apart to tell me it was moving quickly, but deliberately. Bigfoot was not chasing me through the creek. It was staying on the rim, looking for another way down, another place where the terrain favored it instead of me. The creek twisted through a narrow canyon where sheer rock walls rose nearly 20 feet on both sides, turning the stream into a corridor with nowhere to hide. The water only reached my ankles, but every step sent splashes echoing off the stone walls, sounding far louder than they should have. Each splash felt like a signal flare announcing exactly where I was. I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew I would not see anything from down here. The canyon bent often enough that the rim disappeared from view every few seconds, but the sounds above never stopped. Limbs cracked, loose stones rattled downhill. Heavy footfalls thudded through the forest floor overhead before fading, only to reappear farther along. It was matching my pace almost perfectly without ever exposing itself. Why stay hidden if it had no intention of letting me escape? The realization settled over me with sickening clarity. It was still hurting me. Every decision I made was being answered before I even finished making it. Whenever I slowed, the sounds above slowed. Whenever I pushed harder, the crashing through the trees accelerated with me. It never rushed ahead and never fell behind. It simply stayed parallel, using the higher ground to monitor every move while denying me even a glimpse of where it actually was. Every fork the creek offered, I noticed only after passing it, had already been closed off by a shadow along just the right stretch of rim. I hated how obvious the pattern had become, and I hated even more that I had no way to break it. My ankle could barely support my weight. Blood dripped steadily from both shredded palms every time I steadied myself against the canyon wall, and climbing out over the loose rock would have taken strength and time I no longer had. The canyon tightened until the rock walls pressed even closer together, funneling the creek into a bottleneck. Just beyond the bend, the stream disappeared into a deep pool that stretched from one wall to the other. The water was almost black beneath the shadow of the cliffs, its surface so still it reflected the stone walls like glass. I stopped at the edge, desperately searching for another route, but there wasn't one. The walls on both sides were steep piles of loose rock that shifted under the slightest pressure, and attempting to climb them would have cost precious minutes while leaving me completely exposed. Behind me, another heavy crack echoed across the rim as Bigfoot continued moving into position. I realized the pool was not just another obstacle, it was a choke point, and something about how neatly it had funneled me here told me the spot was no accident, and I had reached it with nowhere left to go except straight through. Was this the place it had been steering me toward all along, or only another step in the trap? I waded in up to my chest, the cold hitting me like a fist and stealing what little air I had left in my lungs, and I forced myself across in short, ragged strokes while my ruined ankle dragged uselessly behind me. Bigfoot appeared directly above the pool at the canyon rim just as I reached the far bank, and it dropped to its knees and reached one long arm straight down the rock face toward me, fingers stretching to within a few feet of my head before the angle of the wall stopped it short. I clawed my way up the bank on the opposite side and kept moving before it could find a better angle, my clothes soaked through and heavy, every stride costing double what it should have. Then I spotted it, a shallow overhang cut into the rock where the creek had undercut the stone over centuries, barely large enough for a grown man to wedge himself inside, and I dove for it without hesitation because there was nothing else on that stretch of canyon that offered even the illusion of cover. I pressed my back against damp stone and held as still as my heaving lungs would allow, listening to Bigfoot's footsteps stop directly above the overhang. For a long moment, nothing happened, and I let myself believe that Bigfoot had lost my trail in the noise of the water. And then a hand descended into the cave mouth, fingers thick as tree trunks, scraping stone dust loose above my head. I kicked backward instinctively, wedging myself deeper into the crevice until the rock bit into my shoulder blades, but the fingers found the toe of my boot and closed around it, dragging me forward, inch by inch, no matter how hard I dug my heels against the stone floor. I drew my hunting knife with my free hand, a 6-inch fixed blade I had carried since before my first deployment, and I drove it into the meat of that palm with everything my arm had left to give. The blade sank to the hilt. Bigfoot shrieked, a sound like granite cracking down the length of a cliff face, and it wrenched its hand back out of the cave mouth so violently that the knife tore free of my grip along with it. Dark blood, nearly black in the dim light, spattered across the cave entrance and down onto the creek stones, and I sat there, weaponless and trapped, my chest heaving, listening to Bigfoot pace and snarl somewhere just beyond the overhang. With Bigfoot's hand withdrawn, I searched the back of the overhang for another way out, but found only solid rock. Instead, my hands uncovered human ribs, more scattered bones, and the rusted remains of old gear, a broken rifle stock, a corroded chain, and a handleless knife. It became horrifyingly clear that other armed men had ended up here before me, and Bigfoot had kept pieces of them. This wasn't a refuge. It was a place Bigfoot had used again and again. Had it been leading me here from the very beginning because this was where it always finished the hunt? I could not stay in that hole forever. And I knew it, because Bigfoot was not going to walk away nursing a wound when it had me cornered this close. I heard it pacing above the cave for what felt like minutes, nursing its injured hand, and every second I spent listening was a second I was not putting between myself and it. I forced myself out from under the overhang, dragging my ruined ankle across the wet stones, and when I looked up toward the canyon rim, I saw Bigfoot standing there in full silhouette against the gray sky, cradling its bleeding palm against its chest, watching me with an expression that was somehow worse than rage. It looked almost like respect, or maybe just the patient hatred of something that has decided its prey has earned a slower death, as if deciding whether I'd earned a place among the others in that hollow, or something worse for the wound I'd given it. Bigfoot did not charge. It waited, and that waiting told me everything I needed to know about how outmatched I really was. I tried the canyon wall first, thinking a straight climb might put distance between us faster than another limping run along open ground, and I made it 15 feet up a crack in the rock before a hold crumbled under my boot and sent me sliding back down in a shower of loose gravel and dust. Bigfoot shifted along the rim above at the sound, tracking my failed attempt with its head cocked, and a fist-sized rock came down a moment later, cracking against the stone inches from my scalp and showering me with grit. A second rock followed the first, missing my ribs by less than a foot and shattering against the stone behind me. And I understood that Bigfoot's patience had limits after all, and that I had just spent the last of it. Climbing was not going to work. I abandoned the wall and turned back toward the creek bed, my ankle buckling with every other step, searching for any other way out of that canyon before Bigfoot decided waiting had gone on long enough. I spotted a break in the canyon wall 100 yards downstream, an old logging road half swallowed by blackberry and fireweed, and I understood it was my only real chance at reaching anything resembling civilization. I limped toward it as fast as my ankle allowed, gravel and loose stone crunching under my boots the moment I reached the grade, and I did not look back because looking back would have cost me speed I could not spare. Bigfoot dropped down from the canyon rim behind me with an impact that shook loose gravel under my own boots 20 yards away, and I felt the ground itself flinch under that landing. It closed the gap in 3 strides, faster than anything that size had any right to move, and I felt its shadow fall over me a half second before my foot caught an exposed root and sent me sprawling face first onto the road. Bigfoot was on top of me before I finished hitting the ground. 800 pounds of muscle and fury driving down onto my chest and forcing every ounce of air out of my lungs in one violent exhale. Its face hovered inches from mine, lips peeled back over teeth, built for tearing rather than chewing, breath rolling over me hot and rank with the smell of rotted meat. One massive hand pinned my shoulder flat against the gravel, while the other, the wounded one, hovered above my face like it was deciding exactly where to strike first. I could feel my ribs bending under the weight, could hear my own pulse hammering in my ears louder than anything Bigfoot was doing, and I understood with total clarity that I had maybe 2 seconds before whatever came next ended things permanently. I twisted my free arm hard against the gravel, trying to buy an inch of space, and Bigfoot answered by pressing its wounded palm flat against the side of my head, forcing my skull sideways until my cheek scraped raw against the road. Blood from that torn hand ran hot down the side of my face, mixing with dirt and sweat, and for a moment its full weight shifted forward onto that one point of contact, grinding my head into the gravel hard enough that white light bloomed behind my eyes. I clawed at its wrist with my free hand, useless against something that thick, and I felt consciousness starting to slip at the edges the way it had once during a firefight years ago when a round had grazed my helmet. That memory was the only thing that kept my other hand moving toward my belt instead of giving up. My right hand found the canister clipped to my belt without my brain. Fully registering the decision, muscle memory built from years of carrying bear spray on every single trip into these mountains. I ripped it free, my thumb finding the safety tab through sheer repetition, and I emptied the entire canister directly into Bigfoot's face at point-blank range. A dense orange cloud of capsicum mist engulfed us both instantly, and Bigfoot's scream tore through the canyon at a volume that made my ears ring, a sound of pure animal agony that had nothing calculated left in it. It reared back off my chest, clawing at its own eyes, thrashing blind in a wide, stumbling circle. Though even blind it thrashed with the same terrible strength as before, aim now at nothing, and I rolled clear across the gravel road with my own eyes streaming, and my throat burning from the overspray, drifting back into my face. I could not see clearly, could barely breathe through the burn in my throat, but I crawled forward across the road on hands and knees until my fingers closed around a fallen branch, thick as a fence post, solid oak, heavy enough that lifting it with torn palms sent fresh pain shooting up both arms. Bigfoot was still thrashing a few yards away, blind and disoriented, clawing at its own face in wide, furious swipes, and I staggered up onto my good leg and swung that branch with everything my body had left to give. The first blow caught it across the side of the skull, and it stumbled sideways with a roar. The second blow landed square across the same spot, and it dropped to one knee, the ground shuddering under that impact. Even on one knee, it was more furious than hurt, and I understood blindness, not my branch, was doing the real work of slowing it. I swung a third time, and the branch shattered against its skull into 3 jagged pieces, and Bigfoot didn't care, still clawing blindly at capsicum-soaked fur, no longer able to track me by sight, though its strength hadn't diminished at all. It lashed out once more with its uninjured arm, a wide backhand swing that caught nothing but air an inch from my hip as I stumbled backward out of range. The near miss sent me down onto my bad ankle, and pain shot up through my leg so sharp that my vision blurred. But I forced myself back up because Bigfoot was already shaking its head, trying to clear the capsicum enough to track sound again. I did not have a second branch, and I did not have time to look for one, so I did the only thing left available to me. I snatched a fist-sized rock off the road and hurled it as hard as my shoulder allowed, catching Bigfoot square across the jaw with an impact that sounded like a mallet striking a side of beef. But again, it had no effect. It roared again, staggering sideways off the road entirely and crashing down into the blackberry bramble at the shoulder, a stumble born of blindness, not defeat, and that stumble bought me the only real head start I had gotten since the whole ordeal began. I did not wait to see if it would recover. I limped past Bigfoot on a ruined ankle, every step a fresh negotiation with my own failing body, and the logging road opened into a small clearing where my old F-150 sat rusted and beautiful and exactly where I had left it that morning. My hands were shaking so badly that my keys slipped free and hit the dirt, and I dropped to my knees to find them by feel because I could not risk taking my eyes off the tree line behind me for more than a second at a time. The engine turned over once and died, and for one horrible second, I sat there pumping the gas pedal with a shaking foot while I watched Bigfoot haul itself up out of the bramble at the tree line, still swaying, still blind, but already turning its head toward the sound of my grinding starter. I twisted the key again, and the old V8 caught with a rough, beautiful roar that filled the whole clearing, and I dropped it into gear without waiting for the engine to settle. The rear tires spun loose in gravel for half a second before finding purchase, and I felt the truck lurch forward just as a dark shape closed the last of the distance, and a wounded hand slapped flat against the tailgate hard enough to rock the whole frame and rattle every tool in my truck bed toolbox. Metal buckled under that single strike, and I heard Bigfoot's roar chase the truck down the first 50 yards of logging road before the sound finally began to fall behind. In the rearview mirror, I watched Bigfoot stumble out of the tree line at the edge of the clearing, still blind, still bleeding, swinging both arms wildly at nothing as it tried to orient itself toward a sound it could not see. I put the truck in gear and drove, gravel spraying from my rear tires, and for the first quarter mile, Bigfoot actually kept pace along the tree line paralleling the road, crashing through brush in a last blind effort to track the engine noise. A branch the size of a fence post cartwheeled out of the undergrowth and bounced off my truck bed with a bang loud enough that I nearly lost control of the wheel, and I stomped the accelerator to the floor and did not ease off it even when the road narrowed and gravel sprayed up over the hood. The logging road twisted downhill through a series of switchbacks, and every time I caught a glimpse of the tree line in my side mirror, I expected to see Bigfoot still keeping pace, but the crashing brush behind me grew fainter with each turn until it finally dropped away entirely somewhere around the second switchback. I did not slow down to confirm it. I kept my foot on the floor and my eyes on the road ahead, and I did not stop. And after that first glance in the mirror, I did not look back again.